In Martin Scorsese's gangster epic The Irishman, the mafia hitman Frank Sheeran tells us his life story, which climaxes with him murdering his close friend Jimmy Hoffa, the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. A short while after Sheeran carries out the deed, there is a scene where Sheeran phones up the wife of Hoffa, Jo, and attempts to comfort her and reassure her that Jimmy will be okay, even though he knows he won't and he's the one who killed him. It's a brilliant scene, magnificently acted by Robert De Niro and one of the standout scenes in his filmography. However, there is one apparent flaw in the scene. Just before Sheeran speaks to Jo, he's sitting on the bed looking very depressed and anxious because of what he's about to do. He's looking down and then picks up the phone. When he looks up, his face is quite gaunt, his eyes look really heavy, like he's just woken up. Then immediately there's a cut to where he's almost looking startled, and yet he's still on the phone. The camera angle hasn't changed. It's a really weird cut, like they've skipped a couple of frames, and even the audio seems out of sync for a second. A lot of people notice this, as it's quite bizarre and apparent, and many people have cited different reasons for this strange cut to take place in a movie that was nominated for an Oscar for Best Editing. It could have been that this is one of the many examples in Scorsese's filmography where he favours giving preference to an actor's performance over continuity. When Scorsese and his longtime editor Thelma Schoonmaker edit a film, they like to take the best of an actor's performance from each take of a scene and put it together to display the best possible performance on screen. Often, this results in continuity errors. Things like, for example, if in a reverse shot, a character might have his hands on his hip in one shot, and then in the next by his sides, and then in the next again on his hips. You can see loads of examples all throughout Scorsese's career, whether it be Raging Bull or The Wolf of Wall Street, and The Irishman is no exception. Take the "You're late" scene, for instance. If you rewatch that scene and look carefully, you'll notice a lot of continuity errors. Like for example, when De Niro says 12 and a half, if you look at Tony Pro, he's pointing and clearly talking, but no noise is coming out of his mouth. Instead, his cousin is saying, right in the middle. For the most part, these continuity errors are not noticeable on a first watch, but the one in the phone call scene is so obvious that many people felt there must have been some kind of thematic reason. One I've heard, which might actually be a very decent after-the-fact explanation for the jump cut, is that of course Sheeran is telling us this story from his old age. As such, he might be lying in some areas, he might be covering things up or not telling the full story. Maybe something happened in the phone call that he doesn't want us to know. Maybe he's forgotten something or etched it from memory. Maybe it's just a painful memory for him to recount, so he has trouble bringing it about. After all, he does reference the phone call later on in the film with the priest many years later, highlighting how painful it was for him. I think that's a solid enough reason for the jump cut, but it turns out there is a real and practical reason for the cut to exist. In an interview with IndieWire, editor Thelma Schoonmaker discussed this scene and broke it down. The reason is essentially what I mentioned about combining different takes and accepting continuity errors to preserve and enhance the performance. As she explained, there were some really big jump cuts that we were forced to do because we couldn't figure another way around. I was noticing this morning, working on the restoration of Marty's It's Just Not You, Murray. There's tons of jump cuts. He's always loved jump cuts, but in this film they're often more necessary than intended actually. The most important one being when Bob calls Hoffa's wife. That was all take one, the actual phone call, but when he's holding the phone, he's obviously dialed and he's obviously dreading, hoping she won't be there, and he hears her voice, and the way he picks up the phone and says, "Joe," was absolutely brilliant and is not the same take as the first take. So we have a man named Brian Battles who can morph things when we sometimes don't want to show a cut. Digitally he can, like they're doing in 1917, and he just couldn't crack it. He tried and tried for months, and Marty said, "I'm not giving up on it, jump cut it." He's adamant about that. We will never compromise on an actor's performance. If it requires a jump cut, that's what we'll do. We're not interested in smoothness and babying the audience. We want to challenge them, and certainly we don't want to tell them what to think. Marty is adamant about that. So there you have it. It is simply a case of De Niro's best take of picking up the phone not being the same as the best take of his phone call with Joe, and the filmmakers being unable to find a way to smooth out the shot. You can see why Scorsese was so adamant to keep the shot, because it's one of the best scenes in the film. It's pretty bold though to have such an apparent jump cut right in the face of the audience in the middle of a scene. Of course, Schoonmaker gives the real reason, but I still like the theory that this is a particularly hard memory for Sheeran to go over, and that's the reason for the jump cut. That's what I have in my head canon anyway. What did you think of the jump cut? Did it distract you? And what did you think was the reason for it when you watched the film? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching.